So without further delay, I will pass the screen over to Bob.
Okay, thank you very much, Kathleen. And I'm now screen sharing. Let me bring this up and get it on video. Nope. There we are. Okay, is there a way? Let me see if I can. There, I want to just turn off all the pictures of everyone. Okay. So many of you may have seen this replica of a canal boat, which is really more for entertainment than for transportation. But this is up on the Hugh Muir section of the Delaware and Lehigh National Heritage Corridor in Easton near the Canal Museum. And one way you can tell is the white circle with the red dot was the logo of the Delaware and Lehigh Coal and Navigation Company. Coal was the big thing, and navigation was the big issue. Now, why was it a big issue? This is a problem we have in Pennsylvania. And if you were here really before we were blessed with canals, railroads, and highways, these were formidable barriers. This really shows you the ridge of the Alleghenies, the Ridge and Valley country. The Appalachian Trail comes right down here on the Blue Ridge, all the way down. And of course, southern New Jersey is pretty flat, but even northern New Jersey is very hilly and very much an obstacle. So part of the problem that everyone had was, how do you get through these mountains? How do you travel from one place to another? Here's Erie with Lake Erie, Ohio's over here. It's a real issue. Well, before the Europeans came, the Native Americans were here for at least 10,000 years in this area. And this was, there we see people traveling before canals. This is what it was like, either forest paths that the Indians had, the American Indians had, or where there were a few roads, Conestoga wagons. And this, though, is what the American Indians put together in Pennsylvania. This is a map of historic Indian paths of Pennsylvania. It was published mid-century, last century, by the Historical Museum Commission. It is incredibly accurate. I've taken this map and laid it over current maps, and you'll see the Great Minquist Path, which you know goes out through Rose Valley and so forth. And you see this big bend here. And part of what that is right where Gap is located. I'm sorry, right here. And I laid this over, and sure enough, what is right underneath this path is Amtrak. And the bend here is at Gap, Pennsylvania, between tracks 2 and 3. So they really knew what they were doing, and they covered a very large area. Actually, things were more difficult for the European settlers. They had roads here down near Philadelphia, and everything beyond here was really tough. The big issue is the endless mountains. It seems that way. I remember my wife and I bicycled when I first met her down from Toronto, around Lake Ontario, through the Finger Lakes. And we came down, and as we got to the boundary with Pennsylvania near Sayre, it said, "Welcome to Sayre, scenic center of the endless mountains." And she broke down in tears. She really, it was frightening. But as you see, it was very, very hard. And the big issue, of course, is that all the drainage on this side of the Alleghenies goes down to the Ohio River, down to the Mississippi, to the Gulf of Mexico. So the Eastern Continental Divide is right in here. And getting across that has been a problem for centuries. And this is what the objective was of creating a canal system. So what eventually did happen, a tremendous system was constructed between roughly very early 19th century and about 1850. You had canals coming out of Philadelphia. This is the Schuylkill navigation, all the way to Pottstown, Pottsville, Port Carbon. You had the Delaware and Raritan Canal, which went down here from just north of New Hope all the way over to New York. The Delaware Canal and Lehigh Canal, all part of the same system. But you'll notice in a few places there's no canal. They had inclined planes to link the Susquehanna River Basin with the Lehigh watershed. And the same thing was true over here. The Philadelphia and Columbia Railroad, the main line of public works, as it was called, started out in Philadelphia as a railroad with inclined planes that are still commemorated in Fairmount Park. And this was the predecessor of what's now the Amtrak main line. It was the Pennsylve. But then when you got out to the Susquehanna River, boats were taken up the Juniata River, and then there was another series of portage railroads. Here you can see the canal boats being hauled over the mountains. And this is actually now in a national park, this building, and this is all explained. Then, of course, you came down, then you connected here with Pittsburgh and could go all the way up to Lake Erie, etc. These canals connected to Lake Ontario and actually all the way to Canada. So it was quite a system. Even down in the flatlands, there was a big need for a canal from Chesapeake Bay to connect with the Delaware River. And that canal eventually got widened several times and is today a sea level canal that is used by a lot of shipping. So quite a bit. So here are some pictures of linking between watersheds. Here's New Jersey. Here's the Hudson River. And here you can see the effort that went into doing this. So coming out of the coal country over here around Scranton and Wilkes-Barre, up at just north of Scranton, you had the gravity railroad that climbed up. It was inclined planes from Carbondale to Honesdale. Then you got to the Lackawaxen River, and the line came down here to the Lackawaxen, which is a tributary of the Delaware. And there was a canal that went all along here, and then it went up and through New York, came out of Kingston to the Hudson, and they could bring coal down that way. Now, the question was, they had to climb over the mountains. And in linking these two different watersheds, they also had to get across the Delaware River. So the canal came down, and they actually built an aqueduct. This was designed by Roebling, who went on to do the Brooklyn Bridge and other structures that he's well known for. But he started out, a lot of his work was in the canal business. And this aqueduct is still there. It's now a single lane bridge. It acted as a aqueduct to take canal boats from the canal over here and here into New York State up until about 1898. Then it was converted to a highway bridge. Here you see something really interesting. Going across New Jersey, you had a canal from Easton that went up called the Morris Canal, right here near Hackettstown, and climbed over all these hills, the second and third ridges and so forth, and came all the way down to Newark and then Jersey City and out into New York Harbor. It climbed at incredible heights, and they built all these inclined planes. And you see this cradle here. The canal boats actually were sectional. They bent in the middle. See, there were two compartments with a hinge, so they could be floated into the cradle. The cradle would go up. They would bend here. They'd bend at the top, and it'd be hauled all the way up. But this rope was hauled by stationary engines, which you can see here. Just amazing. Other connections, the Delaware and Raritan Canal. Many of you perhaps have been in New Hope and up along in Upper Bucks and seen the Delaware Canal, and you know there's a canal on the other side as well, and you say, gee, why are there two of them? But the reality is that there was a canal that went from Bordentown at the mouth of Crosswicks Creek, where it comes into the Delaware River, and then that canal went up to Trenton, and then from Trenton it crossed all across New Jersey to Princeton, all the way to New Brunswick and out into Raritan Bay into New York. Now what's very interesting is that when you build a canal that goes from one river over hills and whatnot down to another, every time you open the locks, and I'll explain how that worked, you lose water. So you need a source of water. And what they did was to build a branch of the canal that starts in Trenton and works its way all the way up beyond Lambertville, all the way to Stockton, and then to Bulls Island. And at that point, it opens into the Delaware River, and all year round, water flows into that canal. This was called the Delaware and Raritan Canal feeder because it fed the canal with water. Interestingly enough, the high point between Trenton And New Brunswick is actually very close in Trenton. For some reason, it's right here. So at that point, they brought the canal right in so it could feed water, so the canal never ran out of water. Now, that was such a good idea. Now, you look at this canal and you say, boy, look, it's all filled with water and there are all kinds of controls. The canal is actually a major source of water right to this day for central New Jersey. All of these towns get nice Delaware River water that's captured up here at the Lumberville Wing Dam, pushed into the canal. It comes down the canal by gravity, no pumping, around Trenton, and goes out and serves Heights, Princeton, New Brunswick, etc. And these are the controls, you know, to make sure the water doesn't overflow or whatever. They have all of that. So this, unlike other canals, which are dry because they're not maintained, it's very expensive to maintain a canal. This, being a water source, is actually in use all year round, and everything is kept up beautifully. When you see some of the buildings and some of the weirs and the stonework, it's all kept up beautifully, because every time someone in Princeton flushes a toilet, a nickel goes into the canal, and you know, they have enough money to do it right. Down here, here's the C&D Canal, and that was a critical link. Here you can see an old postcard of a boat coming into Delaware City from the Delaware River. It's larger than the canal boats that you saw in the previous pictures. This canal was always quite large. It was enlarged several times, and then eventually it had locks and whatnot to raise the boats over the hills in the center of the Delmarva Peninsula. But eventually it was dug down as a sea level canal. Now the boats can just go through. But evidence remains of all the engines that were used to then bring water in and so forth. Here you see the Chesapeake City end. Down here, there are two towns, one Delaware City and one Chesapeake City. And what you'll see is this old photograph. You see boats here that have come in from Chesapeake Bay. I'm going to show you how to go down and enjoy this area. There's quite a bit you can do on your own. But let's take a look here. All right, now, nope, I need to zoom out. Well, they have zoom in, they don't have zoom out. There's a zoom out button that is not here. Screen, nope. Okay, let's go back one slide. Darn it. Oh, here we go. Give me 1 second. I'm trying to get to the previous slide, and I'm trying to zoom out because there's important stuff on the other half of this. Anyway, zoom in. Nope. I'm really sorry. The zoom out button is shaded out. I don't know why. But anyway, let's take a look. This is a map. Let me see. Maybe there we go. Okay. Just give me a second here. No zoom out button. There we go. View. Zoom. 100%. Great. Okay. This map is entitled Map of the Canals and Railroads Connecting the Broadtop Coal Region, which is way out in Huntington County, with the Atlantic. The whole issue is, here you see, let me go back and go to screen view. Nope. Now it's zoomed out in again. 1 second. Okay, we'll look here. From the Broad Top Coal region, this is way out. Harrisburg is over here, and this is way out in Huntingdon County. This is a major coal area. And early on, what they did was to publish this map showing, to promote the sale of their coal, it has all the railroad and canal routes. They were used equally. So, you know, all the way down to get to Washington, to get to Philadelphia, to get to New York. Yep. And here you see, this is right here at Columbia. This is where the canal ends, and then they transfer everything to railroads. You can see the number of canal boats on the Susquehanna River, and piles and piles and piles of coal. This made some people very rich. A lot of people had jobs. A lot of people suffered, but this was quite something. And here's a blow up here near Philadelphia. And what you'll see is, here's a boat on the Schuylkill navigation out in this area, and the mule and so forth pulling it along. And you see the railroad and the Schuylkill navigation. And I'll tell you the difference between a canal and a navigation. They're two different things with similar purposes. And this all came down to Philadelphia. You can see here the Lehigh navigation and the Lehigh and Susquehanna Railroad going to Easton. Then railroads coming down along the Delaware and Belvedere, the Delaware Canal, and connections to the Delaware and Raritan Canal over to Raritan Bay and up to New York. So there was quite a system, and they used both. So this is a lot of the canal technology that I'll be explaining. But I think that before I explain it, you'd probably like to see what it was really like in those days 100 years ago or more. So I will stop sharing, and I will share again. And we're going to take, all right, I need to there we go. All right, we're going to share again. Let's try screen share. Here we go. Great. All right, and I came across on a trip that my wife and I did down the C&O Canal on the Towpath. We stopped in Hancock at the National Park Service headquarters for the Chesapeake and Ohio National Heritage Park. And they had an old 1917 film down the old Potomac made by none other than Thomas Edison, who did quite a bit of video. So this is a silent film, but fortunately, I was able to locate a 1913 recording of a song written in 1905 on the Erie Canal. So I'm going to turn that on.
I've got an old mule and her name is Sal. 15 years on the Erie Canal. She's a good old worker and a good old pal. 15 years on the Erie Canal. We've hauled some barges in our day, filled with lumber, coal, and hay. And every inch of the way I know, from Albany to Buffalo.
Notice the coal city of Cumberland, just like on the map.
We must be getting nearer town. You can always tell your neighbor, you can always tell your pal, if he's ever navigated on the Erie Canal. We'd better look around for a job, old gal. 15 years on the Erie Canal. You bet your life I wouldn't part with Sal. 15 years on the Erie Canal. Get up there, gal, we passed that lock. We'll make room for 6 o'clock. So one more trip and then we'll go right straight back to Buffalo. Low Bridge, everybody down. Low Bridge, you got the finest view of town. Once a man named Mike McGinty tried to put it over Sal. Now he's way down at the bottom of the Erie Canal. Oh, where would I be if I lost my pal?
The boat's going to go through the lock.
Oh, I'd like to see the mule as good as Sal. 15 years on the Erie Canal. A friend of mine once got a song. Now he's got a broken jaw. So she let fly with her iron toe and kicked him into Buffalo. No bridge, everybody down. No bridge, you got the finest view in town. If you're looking around for trouble, better stay away from Sal. She's the only fighting donkey on the Erie Canal. I don't have to call when I want more Sal. 15 years on the Erie Canal. She dropped from her stall like a good old gal. 15 years on the Erie Canal. I eat my meals with Sal each day. I eat beef and she eats hay. She ain't so slow if you want to know. She puts up in Buffalo. No bridge, everybody down. No bridge, you got to find a view to town. Needs a bale of hay for dinner and on top of that for Sal. To rise to drink up all the water in the Erie Canal.
All right, I'm going to show you a photo of a tunnel, and you're going to see it actually in use.
You'll hear 'em sing all about my gal. 15 years on the Erie Canal. It's a darn cool city, pop my darn cool bell. 15 years on the Erie Canal. Oh, every band will play it soon. Darn cool words and darn cool tunes. You'll hear it sung everywhere you go. From Mexico to Buffalo. Low bridge, everybody down. Low bridge, it's got the finest view in town. She's a perfect lady and she blushes like a gal if she hears you sing about her and the Erie Canal.
My wife and I walked through this tunnel just a couple years ago.
I've got a no mule and her name is Sal. 15 years on the Erie Canal. She's a good old worker and a good old pal. 15 years on the Erie Canal. We've hauled some barges in our day, filled with lumber, coal, and hay. And every inch of the way I know, from Albany to Buffalo. Low bridge, everybody down. Low bridge, we must be getting near a town. You can always tell your neighbor, you can always tell your pal, if he's ever navigated on the Erie Canal.
Okay. What you see here, this trail, this towpath, towing path, is now the hiking trail that goes the entire distance, hiking and biking, the 180 miles from Washington all the way to Cumberland, where it connects with the Great Allegheny Passage. All righty. You see the mules getting a drink. Just see a little bit of life on the canal, and we'll get back to some slides that'll now make a lot more sense. Pretty elaborate lunchtime. Canal workers worked 18-hour days. They started at 4 a.m. and they worked till 10 p.m. and every day but Sunday. And of course, when winter came along and the canals froze, many of them lived in their boats over the winter, or they had other things they did during the winter time. All righty, we're going to go out of this. I'm going to stop this share and go back to the presentation. There we are. Okay, so let's take a look now. This is a lock that's actually not far from Philadelphia, in Montclair, right across the river from Schuylkill River from Phoenixville. And it's the beginning of the Montclair Port Providence reach of the Schuylkill navigation. That's a whole bunch of words, and I'll explain that when we get the map. But what you see is that this lock was restored by the Schuylkill Canal Association. The gates do actually operate. This is lock number 60 on the way from Pottsville, Minersville, all the way down to Philadelphia. And this is open once a month, and it's also open when the Schuylkill Sojourn is sponsored by the Schuylkill River Greenways, and you'll see all the canoes come through and kayaks, and what happens is they're up here, and when they want to go through, they make sure this gate's closed, and they slowly open this gate here, and the water fills up so the boats can come in and sit here. Then they close the upper gate. Then they slowly open the lower gate, and the water drains down until they're at this level of water and they can go out. What are some of the other things that you'll see? Let me just see here. There we go. What's this thing across the river? It looks like a dam that has the middle of it missing. This is the lower part of New Hope, and this is the Lambertville Wing Dam. And a wing dam looks like a pair of wings. It goes all the way across the river. I took this photograph from Goat Hill, which is a wonderful view above Lambertville, looking out at towards Bucks County. And what they had was, of course, the Delaware Canal is on this side of the river, and the Delaware and Raritan Canal is on this side. And there was an outlet lock so that they could take boats across. There was a cable ferry so the boat wouldn't wash over. And they would draw the boat across and into the Delaware and Raritan Canal, from where it could go down to Trenton and over to New York. The purpose of the wing dam was to raise the water level enough that there was adequate depth for the canal boats. And it was open in the middle because water did go through, and people even today, they'll kayak down, or even tubing, they'll go through this, although you have to be really careful you don't hit rocks and whatnot. But there's another one of these up at Lumberville, and I'll explain that. But the other thing that they had to be very careful about was maintaining canals took a lot of effort. And there was a lot of control in water level. Here you see here you see a section of canal with the towpath. And you'll notice it drops down and comes back up again. You'll also notice this edge is reinforced with masonry. So if there are some very heavy rains, what'll happen is the water level rises up, and rather than wash over and destroy the entire berm of the canal, as it's called, the water has a place to go and go down this side over stone and not destroy the canal. You have other situations. This is Waketchkee Creek, which comes down on the New Jersey side. And what the canal designers decided to do, there was so much water, rather than build an aqueduct here to carry the canal over the creek, they let the creek flow into the canal to provide water. But they also had an outlet so water flows into the Delaware. So you're actually, if you're coming down in a canal boat, you're coming down the canal towards Trenton, and you actually are crossing this stream, but right in it. So there were different ways of handling that. Now, another way is what you see here. This is Tohickon Creek. And because the creek is much deeper into the landscape and the canal is up at this level, they built this beautiful bridge. This was a reconstruction of the original bridge. The canal is up in here, and you'll see boats coming down, and they can continue right across and down to Center Bridge and to New Hope and so forth. A lot of the bridges that you see on the canal, this is a reproduction, and it's actually been modified. This bridge carries a fairly heavy traffic, heavier than the wagons that would have been going over this type of King Post Bridge truss. And what you'll see is there's actually a glue laminated beam here made of wood, which is extremely strong. And I'll bet that the actual truss here isn't really doing very much. It's more decorative. But they did a very nice job of replicating the type of bridge that was very common here. Now, I showed you in the map how things came over the mountains and then came down to the canals. This is up at Penhaven Junction, north of Jim Thorpe on the Lehigh Canal. So you see it's definitely a canal with mules and canal boats. But what's going on here? This big loading area, and you see all these inclines. There were all kinds of mines up in the hills here. And if you go there today, you can see this line of these inclined planes. So what they did was to send the coal in cars down here, and then they actually came out here and they could put the boats underneath and then load all the coal into the canal boats and then continue down. So this was a way of combining railroads with canals. So you saw that map that said the canal and railroad routes, and many times they were multimodal, and this is how it was done. Now, again, one of the problems that we have in Pennsylvania getting between watersheds is the hills in between. The rivers tend to flow north and south. The mountains are in a different direction. It's a real problem. This is an absolutely gorgeous tunnel, and it has just west of Lebanon on the Union Canal. The Union Canal connected the Schuylkill Navigation Canal. Let me go back. Let's see, up here. Yeah, here. Here's Reading. Here's Philadelphia. There's the Schuylkill Navigation Canal. And here's the Susquehanna River. And what they did was to build a canal from Reading that followed up here to Lebanon. And the height of land was right here. And just west of Lebanon, they built the oldest tunnel, transportation tunnel that still exists in the United States. It's the one in my photograph. And then they came down following Swatara Creek down to near Middletown and then connected with the Susquehanna River Canal, the main line of public works. You notice it says feeder here. And what you had up here at Pine Grove was all this water in the mountains coming down. There were lakes and so forth. So they always had water that they could, this canal was used up to Pine Grove, but they always had enough water to feed into this canal. The water flowed down this way to the Schuylkill and down this way to the Susquehanna. And they needed water so that the canal would not run dry. So let's look at some other technologies. There's that tunnel I mentioned, the Union Canal Tunnel. It's beautiful. Other things too, you see, this is actually a culvert on the Erie Canal. Just beautiful stonework. But one time, my wife Nancy and I went up and we did a trip on the Erie Canal. What's really nice is that the Erie Canal does still go from the Hudson River at Albany, goes all the way to Erie, I'm sorry, to Buffalo. And then what you can do is that's all still operated. It got widened several times. It started out as a narrow canal like this. The main part of it now was widened about 1918 to 200 feet and still carries boat traffic. In fact, there's a network that goes up the Champlain Canal to Lake Champlain, and you can make your way eventually to Quebec and Montreal. That is all now part of the Empire State Greenway. With trails as well as the boat traffic. But on our trip from Utica to Syracuse, we followed the old canal, and the towpath was great for cycling. And we got to this little town called Chittenango, and we discovered that it had a canal museum. There's an old canal structure, and this was buildings that were used to maintain canals. They also have a place where they're actually reconstructing things. And they actually did a full-size reproduction of a canal boat to show the technology. You can get in and look at things. And here you can see a model of it. These boats were largely very heavy, let's go back, very heavy wood posts, probably like, 12 by 12s. And then the planking that went up the side was lap planking or groove planking all the way up. So that was how they built these boats. And of course, when they needed to service them, this place was lost. And there was a dentist around 1902 who had a great interest in canals. And he did a little archaeology and discovered all these walls. And he said, my God, this is the old Chittenango Boat Works where they built and maintained boats. So what does that look like? Here we have all these chambers that you saw. And you can see there's something here for something to rest on. The canal is right here. And again, power was very valuable, very hard to get. You tried to do everything with gravity. So if you had a canal boat that needed repair and needed to go into dry dock, you would bring it down here. They would open these gates just like a lock. There was a gate at the other end, an outlet at the other end. And then you would sail your boat in and stop it on top of these blocks. And then they would close the gate and let the water out. And then suddenly your boat was in dry dock and could be worked on. And then after all the repairs were done and it was time to float the boat again, they'd let water in here. The boat would float up. It would go out. They'd close the gate and they'd be ready for another customer. Well, one of the pleasures I have serving on the Philadelphia Historical Commission is getting into all kinds of things that you might not normally see. And most people don't realize, they know that Independence National Park is a national park. It's run by the National Park Service, but the city of Philadelphia owns Independence Hall. The arrangement is the city still owns it and reviews what goes on with it. The Park Service operates the park in it. And as you may know, the tower was built long after the building was there. And I was down for an inspection because a lot of work was going on in the tower. And we were taken by the Park Service architect up into the tower, and he was talking about the repair of this. And it was a really unusual construction he had never seen before. The tower was done in the early 19th century when canal boats were being built by the hundreds. And I said, well, you know, sir, this whole part of the tower with the columns and the grooved planks is exactly how they were building canal boats. In fact, earlier this year, I was up at Chittenango. He called me a week later. He said, the day after I talked to you, I shot up there and went to the museum and saw how they did it and all the tools there. He says, Bob, he says, most people don't realize that Independence Hall has a canal boat sitting on top of the tower. And that's exactly what this is. So it's really fascinating how technology was traded from one thing to another. Okay, you've seen on some maps, or you've heard me talk about a canal and a navigation. The Schuylkill is not a canal, it's a navigation. The Delaware and Raritan is a canal. What's the difference? When you have a canal that is continuous, the whole length of a river, in other words, there might be a river or whatever, it just continues all the way, that's called a canal. But oftentimes, you would have a river, and what they would do, and this is the so-called Vincent Canal. All the canals that are on part of the Schuylkill navigation have a different name, like the Manayunk Canal section, or the Oak section, or the Vincent Canal section. And what you see is this is, there's Royersford, there's Spring City. Phoenixville is just downstream, and the water comes down here in the Schuylkill. There's a big bend. And there's a dam here, the Vincent Dam, and the water was trapped and then forced into this canal. So boats actually traveled in the river. Now there was a towpath on the edge of on the bank of the river, but once this dam was built, there was a pool that was deep enough for navigation. So there was no reason to build a canal as well. And then when you got to an area where there was a steeper drop or it was shallower, then they would build a canal. So then here you see the canal, and there's a lock. Then you get down to Spring City, and there's a lock here, and you continue, there's some other locks, and you come up right near the north end of Phoenixville, and there's what's called an outlet lock. So you see the boats would come down the canal, and then they would go through these locks. They'd be out in the river, and there's a towpath here. And sometimes there was a towing bridge, it was called, which was a small, narrow bridge that allowed the mules and the mule tenders to cross and then continue their work, and the boat was hauled down the river. This is the Black Rock Tunnel, and this is the former main line of the Reading Railroad, now Norfolk Southern, that goes up to Reading. And here you can see Peacock's Lock. This is it. And what you'll see is the outlet lock where the canal boats came down. There's a towpath here. And when the boat came out, it actually was just in the river with the towpath along the side. You can see one of the bridges over the Schuylkill River up here. So that's really the difference. So you'll see companies like the Lehigh Coal and Navigation Company, based in Jim Thorpe. Obviously they mine coal, but they also built their own navigation, as it was called, where they had various pools connected by canals and locks and dams that got the boats up and down. So where can you go? I'm going to talk about some of my favorite places and give you some information to find your way. This is, you'd think this is far, far away from Philadelphia, but those of you who've just gone to the next county of Bucks know this is up in Upper Bucks County. And look at the way this house is dwarfed by these Nockamixon cliffs. Just beautiful. And what you see here is that there's a lot of maintenance that has to happen. This is a state park, not a state water authority. So they're short on money. And when I took this photo, they had drained the canal to do repairs. Also, when I took this photo, the towpath had been pretty overgrown. And now this has had some crushed stone paving with the red shale that looks really pretty. And you can see the way that they brought the canal down. Here's River Road. So let's go and see, where can you go? Well, one of our newest trails along Canal is the Mike Castle Trail, named for the governor who did a great job in the state of Delaware. And they actually got together with their neighbors in Maryland. This is the boundary. This is actually the Mason-Dixon line, which most people don't realize goes vertically. After it gets to Delaware, it runs down and it divides Maryland from Delaware. So a canal was constructed with locks across the Delmarva Peninsula. Coming out here, it came out here originally and went through Delaware City. So a city was formed where all the transfer took place. That's Delaware City. And you see a photograph of it here. This is the old canal. The modern one goes straight ahead. And you'll see ocean-going ships coming through here from Philadelphia, then taking on goods at Baltimore, then heading out Chesapeake Bay, out into the Atlantic Ocean. Down here, so then there were locks and levels, and you see this big pond here, Lum's Pond. That was done because, again, they needed water for the canal. The water ran out this way when they opened the locks, and it ran out this way when they opened the locks here, and they needed to have a good supply. So anyway, but then when it became a sea level canal, that was no longer an issue. But in Chesapeake City, you can visit, the Corps of Engineers has a museum for the canal, and you can see the stationary engines that pumped water up and also were used to open the gates and so forth and so on. You can see here the town of Chesapeake City, and also over here. When the canal was very narrow, it was like New Hope. You could just walk from one part of town to the other. You can walk from North Chesapeake City. This is Schaefer's Restaurant, and it's about a mile to where the bridge comes down. Then it's 2 miles across and then another mile back. At least there is a stairway. But now there's actually a passenger ferry that runs Thursday through Sunday across here, because when this trail was brought on here, it goes all the way. It's just great. It's about 18 miles long. So it makes a nice day trip because it's all flat. And a lot of wildlife and other things you can see. It gets around. They solved all the problems. This is really a really neat thing. There are lots of wildlife refuges and stuff along here as well. And of course, Chesapeake City is filled with historic buildings, as is Delaware City, and they're good places to eat and just sit down and admire, you know, the Delaware River, which is becoming Delaware Bay here, or enjoy the wonderful river views of Chesapeake City. Obviously, there are a lot of boaters now that use all this as well. But this only opened recently, and it's really because the state took, this trail was getting built about a mile a year. So I figured at my age, when I was 106, I'd be able to go from one end to the other. But they just decided, for economic development reasons, they realized that this would be extremely popular, and it is. And it's just a great thing. There are also other roads that you can bike on the other side, so you could make a loop doing that as well. But this is something to look up. And just to be correct, the trail, the section of the trail that's in Maryland has a different name because it was sponsored by someone else, but two states got together and did this. All right, here we are back to the Delaware River. Here's Trenton, Yardley, New Hope and Lambertville, all the way up to Easton. And what you can see, the dashed line is the Delaware Canal. It comes all the way down, and of course it continues down to Bristol below this map. Here it links with the Lehigh Canal, and follows this all the way up to Jim Thorpe and beyond. And it's all part of the Delaware and Lehigh National Heritage Corridor. There it is, Delaware and Lehigh and National Recreational Trail. It's 168 miles long, and it's getting done very quickly. On the New Jersey side, you can see here the Delaware and Raritan Canal, which then continues here up to Princeton and out to New Brunswick. It ends here because that's the inlet right at the Lumberville Wing Dam. However, there was a railroad that paralleled it that was abandoned sometime in the 1970s by Conrail. And as they abandoned it, it was purchased by the state for state park purposes. So now you have the canal and you have a rail trail that's actually right next to the canal, but that continues all the way up to Milford. The reason it doesn't go further is there's still a railroad here. It has occasional excursion trains, but it's actually a project I've been pushing to get a link here so you could do loops. What's really nice is you have bridges at Regalsville, Milford to Upper Black Eddy, Frenchtown to Eulerstown, Stockton to Center Bridge, Lambertville to New Hope, Washington's Crossing. So there are lots of loops possible, and I'm sure some of you have enjoyed some of them. There are also many back roads that connect to these and make all sorts of things possible, and other trails like along the Tohickon. But this is just an amazing resource to have two canals from this early 19th century that are still here and still can be enjoyed in many ways. Here's the other wing dam I was talking about. This is the Lumberville Wing Dam. And this is where the water is then trapped and then put into the Delaware and Raritan Canal. But you'll see people tubing and whatnot and going through there. Down here on the Delaware Canal, this is near Washington's Crossing. You can see my wife Nancy getting her bike wet, and why. This is a weir, so that when the canal has high water, to prevent damage, it's flowing out not over the crushed stone or gravel towpath, which would get washed away, but over this concrete. So usually the water's not very deep. If you're walking, it's just, like a very shallow puddle. But sometimes, and it's been in the winter when I've been here, where the water is up high, and then you really think about, do you really want to walk through it? But that's the way it was. Now, in many places, there are footbridges, sometimes only a couple feet wide, over the weir, so you don't have to get your feet wet. Another great canal, and of course you saw the film a short while ago. There's Cumberland, there's Washington. Now, of course, what's the story on this? Well, this is a railroad. Originally, the canal was supposed to go all the way so that you could then, take a boat to Pittsburgh and down the Ohio River. They never crossed the mountains beyond Cumberland. As they said, that film said, the coal town, they would bring coal here by railroad and put it on the canal boats. But this railroad, there were two railroads that went from Cumberland all the way to, there's Cumberland. This is just two sections of the C&O Canal. They went from Cumberland all the way across the mountains to Pittsburgh. One railroad is now the Great Allegheny Passage, the old Western Maryland Railroad. And the other railroad, the B&O, is now, it's either Norfolk Southern or CSX, and it's also the Amtrak route. But if you're coming down the towpath, it goes all the way through here. One of these bends, there's Paw Paw. And you can see the river going around here, and there's the Paw Paw Tunnel that took until 1850 to cut through, but it's there. And then when you get down here, you're near Antietam, Shepherdstown, Harper's Ferry. This is where the Potomac River meets the Shenandoah. They combine at Harper's Ferry and cut through the mountains. The Appalachian Trail is coming right down here, and this continues out past Great Falls all the way to Washington. What's really nice about this, if you're doing a trip, and here you can see Harper's Ferry. This is the main line that has Amtrak. This is a branch line that goes down. And then here you see the town of Harper's Ferry, the national park and whatnot. The C&O Canal is right along here on this side. The thing that's really neat is there's train service all along this entire length. So you can take a train from Washington to Harper's Ferry or stay on the train to Cumberland. There are commuter trains that go as far as Martinsburg. So a lot of the trips that I've done have been by getting to Washington and taking the train one way and biking back another and doing sections of it. So it's really worth looking into. There are both local trains from Washington that run, as I say, as far as, let's see, there's Harper's Ferry to Martinsburg, commuter trains, and then the Amtrak trains continue beyond, and they go all the way, this train line goes all the way to Pittsburgh and then Chicago. And what's nice is there's a station between Cumberland and Pittsburgh. So you have options to get to Connellsville and to Pittsburgh. Lots of things you can do. All right, where are sections of the Schuylkill Canal that are still active? And there are two principal ones. There's some minor pieces, but the main one, of course, is the Manayunk Canal. And many of you have been there. I was lucky to grab this picture just before they stopped running trains here. The railroad was actually built on top of the old towpath to serve the industries on Venice Island, as the land is called between the canal and the river. But what was done, the towpath was buried under the railroad. Towpaths are usually on the river side of a canal. And then back in the late 70s, the city had to clean up the canal because this is a source of water supply, to dredge it and whatnot. And then they built this so-called towpath, although if you're a real canal aficionado, you know the towpath would never have been on the land side of the canal. It was always on the river side. But it's in some places a boardwalk, in some places a walking path. Further out, however, in Montclair, there's Royersford, there's Phoenixville in Montclair, and this piece of the canal, of the Oaks Canal, is still there and has been in continuous use since the 1820s. People use it to get access to fishing places. They just use it to go up and down the canal. And there's this wonderful place called Fitzwater Station, which is a restaurant with a great deck. And I think they have reopened. Here you can see the towpath. And the towpath did go straight at one time. It wraps around here because there's a bridge over the canal. But this is a great place to stop if you're walking or bicycling. And of course, the question is, why is it called station when there was never a railroad here? Well, it was supposedly a station on the Underground Railroad. So there's a lot of history about the Underground Railroad, and this building is part of that. All right, if you go further north, there's also some great sections of canal along the Lehigh Canal and in many areas. And if you get their guidebook, which is online at the Delaware and Lehigh National Heritage Corridor, you'll see them. And what you see here is the town of Lehighton, just north of the Pennsylvania Turnpike. The town of Weisport is on the other side. They're a pair of towns. And then as you go up, you start getting into the Lehigh Gorge. And one place you come out is the town of Jim Thorpe. And then the canal continues up from there. This is this is the part of Jim Thorpe that most visitors go to. There's more of the town over here. What you see is there's the towpath. Now, of course, when it was an active towpath, there never would have been a tree here because the line would have been snagged by the mules walking past, and they would have gotten caught while it was connected to the boat. But this makes for absolutely delightful walking and cycling. I took this photo in November when we went to spend a day trip, and we went from Whitesport all the way up to Jim Thorpe, had a wonderful lunch, and came back. Now, what made that possible, though, was the towpath had been severed, and there was no way to get into the historic part of Jim Thorpe other than swimming or climbing over a chain link fence around the sewer plant that had barbed wire, you know, not a lot of fun. Well, it took several years, but the DNL in the past year opened this, what's called the Mansion House Bridge. And there was a hotel here called the Mansion House. It disappeared some time ago, but this takes the towpath here. You climb up, you have a wonderful jump across the Lehigh River with great views, and you're in the town of Jim Thorpe. That's right here. So this makes a wonderful day trip. Weisport is an interesting old town. has a beautiful green, some nice things commemorating different activities. It's a small town, not a lot of food, but some things, and but wonderful walking on this towpath. Let's go down. And that really brings us then to questions that you have. So I just put this up that really what's been happening, this is along the Delaware River. We were walking down the towpath near Lumberville. There you can see River Road. But this view looking out here is probably not changed in hundreds of years, except all the big trees were sawed down. But the idea of forest and water and just figuring out how to take this river that was handed down to us and how to make it really work in terms of navigation is what this canal system did. And of course, that led to railroads. And then of course, the railroads ended up putting most of the canals out of business. Other than canals like the Chesapeake and Delaware and the Erie Canal, the Champlain Canal, there's a network that still operates. And that's it. So I'll be delighted to open up for questions.
Bob, thanks so much. That was a really enjoyable lecture. It's remarkable how much you know about canals, and I think even more remarkable how many you visited. So thank you for giving us that introduction. I know how I'll be spending some of my weekends, and I hope, and I think you probably already do this on a smaller scale, but that you might consider leading some day-long trips along these.
Well, actually, I've done that for years.
Okay.
Through the Philadelphia Parks Alliance, and many groups like the Conservancy, have teamed up on that.
Yeah.
And
well,
we just had a board meeting yesterday for the Alliance, and I will be starting up tours again.
That's great.
At the end of June.
Wonderful. The Conservancy would be happy to partner with,
with
you on any of those.
We will do that as we've done before. And
okay.
That's honestly, I have to say, the way that I've learned, one way that I've really learned all this is by leading all these tours. I've probably led 400 tours over the years.
That's really incredible.
When you do that, and then of course, a lot of this is things I've worked on. I mean, one of the most exciting things was being the architects for the restoration of the Montclair-Port Providence reach of the Schuylkill navigation and getting the trail in and so forth. There's a long history to that. But no, getting out and seeing it is just amazing. And there's endless stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But seeing how it connects also is really, really good.
Yeah. We do have questions.
Yeah, so let's go.
So good. I'll just start at the top and move and move down.
Okay.
We have a question from one audience member. Were the canals all downhill?
The answer is that in their levels, they were level. In other words, when you came through a lock, let me go back to the map that I showed. Here. All right. There you can see the arrow. The river is flowing downhill, right? But once you came through a lock, between that lock and the next lock, the water was level. Now, it did flow. It did flow down because when the water got here, it dropped down to the next level. Then it was level all the way here. Then it dropped down again. So, but it was level. Now the levels that in the river, they did drop down, from one dam to another. But in general, when the canals were built, they were all level, but the reason that there was a current was that they flowed in one direction. However, one of the things you can do, because there's very little current. Now this section of canal is no longer there, or the navigation. But if you go up to the Schuylkill Canal navigation let's go back to a map here. Right. When this has water in it, what I've done, or the outfitters will do for you, is that you can actually canoe upstream because there's very little current in the levels, then put out in the river. Now what you do is you walk up, then you get to a lock, you have to get out carry the boat up and then put it in again, and carry it up and put it in again because the locks aren't operating. But then when you decide to go back in the river, then you can come downstream. I've done that there. I've canoed here near Princeton and done the same thing. So, but the answer is this: what you see here, the canal is pretty much level.
Okay. Next question. What is the name of the tunnel that you showed in the image, and where is it?
Oh, it's the Union Canal Tunnel, and it is here, and it's just west of Lebanon, Pennsylvania.
That's the image that we had on our slide, I believe, that advertised
Yes.
the lecture. Is that correct?
Yep.
And there's still water that's running through it?
Well, this section of the canal is now a park, and there are two parts of it connected by the tunnel. So it was restored and watered, so that it looks like it did when it was in operation. And you can actually, paddle your kayak or your canoe through the tunnel if you want. However, when you get to a certain point where the park ends, the canal stops. And if you find it at all, it's just an old ditch or whatever.
Okay. Well, you've answered the first part of this question. Are there local canals to walk along? The second part, I don't think that we've talked about are there canals that people can actually take boat rides or barge rides on?
Yes.
Locally.
On the Delaware Canal, there's generally a barge ride if the water is right in the New Hope area. In Easton at Hugh Moore Park, that one is the first slide I showed, that operates. And I'm just thinking, so those are the two that are close to Philadelphia. There's a lot of traffic on the Erie Canal. In fact, you can rent a boat for a week and travel on it with a motor and stay in different towns and whatnot. Very similar to what you find on the canals in Europe.
Mm. Here's an intriguing question. Was traffic one way?
No, it was always two-way. And there was a whole protocol about who went first. And also there was a whole courtesy of if one canal boat was passing another, the one that was, I think, on the outside away from the towpath, they stopped and dropped their line. And then the boat going the other direction, the mules went around and pulled the boat across their line, and then they could both continue. So no, they were two-way. And there were places where there were basins, as they were called, there was more room, but the boats were fairly narrow on most of these towpath canals, like on the order of 9-10 feet, often very long, 85 feet, but they were narrow. And they did go in one direction, in both directions. Now, when you got to a tunnel or an aqueduct, sometimes that was only one way. So obviously there was a protocol of who got to go first. Now, there's a very funny story about the, let's see. About this tunnel that you saw in the Edison movie. This is the Pawpaw Tunnel. And it's obviously it took them at least 20 years. It was hand dug out of rock. I mean, I don't know how they ever did it. But anyway, there were two boatmen that entered the canal. They got near the middle and neither one would back up. And well, that wasn't very good. But then what happened is that they wouldn't budge. And this went on for several days and then for a week. And of course, all the other canal boats were backed up. So they wouldn't listen to anyone. And so, but the people on the canal who managed the canal, they knew what to do. They put a big tarp over each end of the tunnel, and they lit very smoky fires inside until both canal boats made their way out, to gasping for air. But no, they were two ways.
Okay. Is climate change affecting water levels? I assume canal water levels.
Yes. it's affecting water levels everywhere. And the issue is that, I mean, we're blessed in this area that we have enough water, you know, to grow crops and keep our streams filled and all of that. The problem is with climate change, where we're getting, you know, very severe storms, then you get severe flooding, and severe flooding destroys canals. So the level of maintenance on the canals that we have left is increasing, and that's not good.
Okay. How deep does a canal have to be to accommodate a barge, and do canals have to be dredged?
Canals do have to be dredged. I didn't show you, there was a whole fleet of boats that was used to dredge the Schuylkill navigation. If you go up on the Erie Canal, you can see the boats today do that. As far as the depth, my guess is about 5 or 6 feet on the towpath canals, and I'm guessing at that from what I've read. Obviously, wider canals with bigger boats would have a greater depth.
Okay.
The other thing is that even in the book that I read, they talked about, you know, canal barge. And one of the things that I was really very glad I got to see, there was a annual conference and a program sponsored by the Schuylkill River Greenway Association, now Schuylkill River Greenways, back in the early 80s when I got involved with them in the 70s with the Schuylkill River Trail. And they had this conference, all-day conference about, you know, what everybody was doing and so forth in Phoenixville, in the old train station. And they were able in 1980 or so, they had 5 older gentlemen who had worked on the canal. The canal stopped running in 1932. So if these guys were, let's say, 16 years old in 1932, in 1980, well, you could figure it out. They were still in their 70s, 80s, whatever. And they talked all about working on the canal. And they said, and it's not a barge. It says it's a boat. A barge is something you know, that has no steering. And the canal boats have a big rudder in the back, because obviously if the mule was pulling the canal, it wasn't pulling it from the front, it was pulling it to the side. So you had to steer. They said, and we went through very tight spaces, and we knew how to steer. We knew how to steer our boats. I remember the guy yelling at that. You know, he was really offended if you said the word barge. You know, so so the real term is from a canaler, or canaler as they called themselves. I heard it right from a canoler that they were canal boats, not barges. So that's that.
All right. Well, I won't make that mistake again.
Okay.
How or what was the main product that was transported?
Coal.
Coal. Okay.
Now, obviously, the boats, it's not a good idea if you have a boat. You don't want to, you know, I mean, they carry grain and flour. You heard that in the song. You saw the map about the, you know, the coal routes to the the Atlantic seaboard. They did carry manufactured goods and other things that people needed on the return trips, you know, from the factories that were in the cities.
Mm-hmm. What was the name of the performer who sang the Erie Canal song?
It's on, I'd have to go back to that file. If you go into where I found it was, it's the Erie Canal song. If you put in Erie Canal song 1913, it comes up with the 2 people who made that recording.
Okay, great. Thank you. Here are 2 related questions. I'll put them together. How were the boats powered, and did they ever use steam power?
The answer is they were powered simply by mules. You know, the mules pulled them. They did not use steam power or motors, and part of that is also the delicate nature of the canal and the you know, the very tight clearances all along would have made a steam powered thing really a problem. Now, that picture that I showed you of the Chesapeake and Delaware here, this is obviously steam powered, but also this is after the canal was widened. right? So while it is a canal, just as the Panama Canal and the Suez Canal are canals, it's not a towpath canal after this was done. So there were steamships with much greater draw as well. But the one thing that was tried at one point on the Lehigh navigation was an electric mule. And obviously the streetcar technology, electricity was a big thing. There was actually quite a bit of electricity that was generated from stations along the canal that used hydropower. There's still a hydropower plant in Upper Bucks County. You can see it when you go up the towpath. And that electricity was used to power the trolley that ran from Doylestown to Easton on its way to Delaware Water Gap. So the question about did they use anything else? There was an experiment where they put in a mule, they called it, that was powered by an overhead trolley line, and it didn't work very well. But that's the only example I have of, you know, things being used other than mules. The last mule-drawn boats were about 1932 on the Schuylkill Navigation, and I don't know the date on the D&L. About the same. I mean, they also were cut back section by section, but the last part that went from Easton down to Bristol operated till about then also. And one of the reasons was that you didn't have railroads everywhere, and in terms of shipping coal, they were very efficient, and you could provide coal to towns that had no railroad service. So they lived right to the end. Many of the canals, though, where they were paralleled by major railroads, they stopped running even in the 1890s.
Okay. I'm going to combine two questions here because I think they're relevant to one another.
Sure.
Who owned the canals? And then can you talk about the competition between Pennsylvania and New York?
Oh, yeah.
Which way goods would flow?
Okay. Who owns the canal? Well, in Pennsylvania, it was part of the, you'll see like Delaware Division, Pennsylvania Canal. The state bought up right-of-ways. But then as the canal became unprofitable, the Pennsylvania Railroad stepped in and bought out a lot of it, on some of it. So there are different parts owned by different people. Where they were abandoned, I know in our architectural work in doing heritage corridors and trails, we found that a lot of the canal lands were held by so-called reversionary rights. The canal companies, which didn't have a lot of money, came in and they had to buy up a right-of-way from one owner after the other, and they would say, okay, for the benefit we're going to give you, you know, you'll let us have the land, but if the canal ever stops operating, then it'll return to you. And that's the way early railroads were done too. So what's happened now is a lot of the canal right away, even if you can see the canal, you know, where they're no longer in operation, has reverted to owners or their descendants. What was the second part of the question? Who owns it? And then
who owns it? And can you talk about the competition between Pennsylvania and New York?
Oh, yes, this is a big thing. Let's go back. Okay, let's look at this map. In the late 1700s, the United States passed the Northwest Ordinance, and Northwest did not mean Oregon and Washington and, you know, Montana. It meant beyond the Alleghenies. And Ohio is right here. And Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois, of course, were wonderful farmlands. The problem was, how in the world do you get there? So everybody got interested in getting to Ohio. You know, later on, you know, people said California or bust, but in the old days, it was Ohio or bust. So they formed all kinds of companies: the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad, the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal. You know, that was the objective. Well, at the same time, the people in New York said, well, we want to get there too. Well, you know that if you go up the Hudson River to Albany, and then you go up the Mohawk River, you get to relatively flat land. You go in between the Catskills and the Adirondacks, you end up coming out at Buffalo, and then you're already at, you know, Lake Ontario, and you can get down to Lake Erie. So in fact, that's the route that the New York Central Railroad took. Well, anyway, of course, crossing 400 miles of New York State in the very early 1800s seemed as impossible as going to the moon. But DeWitt Clinton was the governor of New York, and he came up with the idea, and he built certain sections. And then people said, well, okay, well, we really got to connect those sections. And he ended up getting the whole canal done. Well, no one could believe that that would happen, but it did. And then suddenly Philadelphia, which was the principal city in the country, realized, wait a second, if New York can send things by boat up the Hudson and over the canal to Buffalo and then down through the Great Lakes, Philadelphia is going to be out of business. So if you read the old ledgers of what went on in, you know, the news, that the state legislature was just like today. They didn't want to vote any money. It's too expensive. Well, they saw that it was curtains for Pennsylvania. So that's how they created the main line of public works. Now, most people, when they think of the main line, they think of, you know, Overbrook, Narberth, Murray, you know, Paoli. But the main line of public works went from Philadelphia all the way to Pittsburgh. And as I said, it was a railroad to Columbia, canal, boat up through the Juniata River, all the way to Hollidaysburg, the inclined plains over the roof of the Alleghenies, down to Johnstown, and then the canal following the Conemaugh River and then the Allegheny River down to Pittsburgh. So that was really put on steroids to try to recapture all the business that was lost from New York. So that was the big battle. And it was replicated in the railroad world. You had the Pennsylvania Railroad and you had the New York Central, you know, enemies to the death. And there's a whole story of, you know, Cornelius Vanderbilt trying to build his own railroad across southern Pennsylvania. There are half-finished bridges still standing in the Susquehanna River at Harrisburg and never were completed that were part of that issue. But that was the thing that really got a lot of the really complicated canal work going, was the fact that the water level route was completed here in New York.
I think this might be a hardball question. Okay.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Sure.
If the towpath was on one side and the canals were two-way, what was the protocol for getting each other, getting by each other? It sounds like an SAT question.
I just mentioned that. I'll repeat it.
Yeah, when the boats were attached to
imagine that you have
mules.
two canal boats approaching each other and with mules on the same towpath, right? So there was a protocol that the boats in one direction, I can't remember whether it was upstream or downstream or whatever, but anyway, one boat would stop, right? And the lines would slacken and fall to the bottom of the canal. And the mules would step to one side. Then the other boat would come and it would be pulled by its mules, right, beyond the other mules, and it would pass over the lines for the other boat. Once that had passed, then the boat that had stopped, its mules would start up. The ropes would be, the towing lines would be pulled up out of the water, and they would continue going. That's how it was.
All right. Okay. So we have just 3 more questions, I think.
Okay.
If you can hold on that
Yes.
long. Okay. When did the age of dependence on canals for transportation end?
I'd say, in terms of actually, you know, depending on them, it depended upon where you were. You could just look at, if you could easily look up when were certain sections of canal abandoned, and obviously once that happened, it was clear that the railroads had taken over. As I said, there were a few places that, because they were not served by railroads, you know, they continued to operate. And oftentimes the same company, like the Pennsylvania Railroad, had both the railroads and the canals in certain areas, so that if they needed to transfer stuff from one thing to another, like from the railroad to the canal, they could do that. But I would say that the big era of canal building really ended by the Civil War. And the other thing that drove the canals out of business was the railroads were year-round. The canals had to, you know, the winters were pretty cold and the canals froze over. So there was no activity from, you know, I guess November, you know, up until the breakup in maybe April. So they really lost a lot of business that way, and the railroads, of course, could operate. So that was that.
Okay. For future, for those of us who want to get out and visit some of these places, do you have recommendations about maps or resources, guidebooks, histories that that readers can refer to other than the online guides for the National Heritage Corridor?
Yes, well, if you go to those websites for Schuylkill River Greenways, for Delaware and Lehigh, for Delaware and Raritan State Park, Morris Canal, on and on, they have a lot of resources. As far as, yeah, there's some books, actually some are hard to get that have a lot of pictures and so forth. In terms of guidebooks, I mean, so I don't know that there's a book on, like there's a Keystone Trails Hiking Pennsylvania book, which has all the major trails in it. There's nothing that puts all the canals together. I learned a lot about the Delaware Canal because it was in a book called Hiking from Inn to Inn, and one that was published in the 1960s, I think. We used it in the 1970s, and one of the trips they had was along the Delaware Canal. It just so happened that the Towpath made a great hike, which it still does. So, but I think those areas are a good place to start. A lot of the information I have is, in different kinds of things. As far as mapping to, see where they are. Lots of times especially now with the internet, I'll go, like we were working along the Juniata Canal. And so I looked up an 1870s atlas, and they had very detailed maps of each township with the canal shown with all the features and the locks and the basins and everything else, which helped us find stuff. And even places, where it's laying out the 9/11 trail, we could put it back.
Well, there's several suggestions here that you actually write that guidebook or create that atlas.
It's on my list.
Good. Yep. All right. And then finally, I guess I'll leave with this, because I think that so many people on the call are interested in knowing how can we be kept up to date about when your next tour, canal trip tour is, and how can we make sure that we can all tag along?
Okay.
Is there kind of an email list that we could create, or some way of getting that information out there?
Yeah, I list them, and also when they're co-sponsored, at www.philaparks.org, the Philadelphia Parks Alliance.
Okay. And
now,
we'll
if
make
you go
sure
there now, you'll see some tours, except that there was nothing after the COVID began.
Okay.
But I was just talking with Steve Taylor, who does all of our events, and we coordinate with you and the Sierra Club and one group after another, and that would be the place to find them.
Excellent. All right, and if we do partnerships,
checking that would be good. I expect I'll be listing stuff within a couple weeks, because if we're having our first tour in the latter part of June, I usually like getting them at least, and I do typically one a month.
excellent.
And they are from Chesapeake Bay up to the Poconos, and they're usually a day. The summer they're often shorter ones, late in the day. So that would be a good way of finding out.
Excellent. And we have somebody who's posted a link at the bottom of the page, bottom of the chat, if you want to check in on that, audience members. So, well, thank you so much, Bob. It's always a pleasure to have you as our speaker. Outstanding presentation. Thanks to all the audience members. It was really a record-breaking audience, and we're so happy that you were able to join us tonight.
Okay, and I unfortunately I couldn't see any of you, but I do tours for several reasons. A, it's fun for me. B, it's good exercise. But C, I meet so many good people. It is amazing. I had a tour along the Schuylkill canal up in Berks County, and someone who never came to meetings or anything came out and he had all these log books that his grandfather had done, all the drawings, and do you want to see this? And you want to come back to my house and see my collection? And, you know, so there, people really, really get excited about this stuff, all the masonry and so forth. There's a lot of things that are really special. One of my favorite places for coffee is in Muellerstown. And the name of it escapes me at the moment, but it's the last Canal store that is still on the Delaware Canal. The Canal stores face the canal because that's where people got off, right? You wouldn't have a Wawa that faced away from the road, but it still faces the canal. And of course, they have tables out there. And of course, when you drive up to the backside. But Homestead Coffee Roasters, here's a pitch for them. They have wonderful, wonderful stuff. So, but again, that's a large part of, you know, the canal world is also the geotouristic world of local things and special things, historic things, things that make it unique. So definitely get out and enjoy.
We will. All right. Have a good evening. Thanks again, Bob. Thanks again, everybody.
Okay, thank you for inviting me.
Sure.
Okay.
Good night.
Good night.